Okay, Amy, it looks like I've finally connected us. I apologize for the technical glitches. We've
No
had
problem.
some internet issues with the storms in Boston, and I know that it's stretched all the way down to where you are, and you
Absolutely.
had a week off of school for the kids. So,
Yes, we have received our fair share.
well, Amy, I just wanted to first of all thank you so much for taking so much time out of your day. You are a very busy prosecutor, as all prosecutors are. It's almost redundant to say busy prosecutor. And thank you for joining us on Why We Do What We Do, an interview series here at Marsy's Law. And the whole idea behind it, and the name kind of says it all, is over the years that we've all been working with Marsy's Law and with the different states where Marsy's Law has been passed, we've met so many incredible advocates for victims and survivors. Some of them are moms of murder victims who have started a movement. Some of them are prosecutors. Some of them are community organizers and activists. And they all seem to have a common thread, that being they're motivated to do this work. And once people get into this work, it's kind of a self-motivating work and job.
Absolutely.
But especially in cases like yours, um, I found yours goes all the way back to when you basically were a toddler as to why you do what you do. So if we could just
Certainly.
start off with a little bit of what you're doing right now, and then if
Mhm.
you could take us back to your role model in the world of the criminal justice system, leaders, and your dad, who started out, I think, as a police officer.
Absolutely. What an honor to be here. Thank you for having me and to give me the opportunity to talk about why I am where I am and who brought me here is such a privilege. So, I am currently the first assistant Commonwealth's attorney in McCracken County. That is in far western Kentucky. And in this role, I lead the vulnerable victim unit. And that is a unit of specialized prosecution that is focused on crimes of child abuse and exploitation, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And prior to coming to McCracken County, I had the great privilege of serving as the Deputy Executive Director of Victims Advocacy at the Kentucky Office of the Attorney General. And I cannot say enough wonderful things about the Attorney General's office in Kentucky. Everyone that I had the privilege to call colleague and friend is an extraordinary advocate, both for Marsy's Law, crime victims in general. And my time there was incredible and actually inspired me. General Russell Coleman, Attorney General Coleman, inspired me with his motivation. He used this incredible language, Peter. He wanted to target harden the Commonwealth from predatory crime. And it's such outstanding language, and he has such outstanding passion for justice. And it sent me right back to the front lines of target hardening McCracken County now from that predatory crime, and which is where I have the privilege of serving now. Before going to the AG's office, I was also first assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Graves County. And then, as a very young lawyer, I served as an assistant county attorney in Lexington, Kentucky. So, all of those wonderful opportunities that I have had began because I grew up in a household. I was so very fortunate to have a mother and a father who were very focused on family. They, as a child abuse prosecutor, I see situations that are so very lacking in that stability and in peaceful homes. And my parents looked at me and they said, "Hey, you can be anything you want to be." And so not only was I told I could achieve, but I was shown achievement and dedication to public service through my father, Craig Clymer, who for 23 and a half years was a judge. And I watched him. He began as a law enforcement officer, a patrol officer. He then was a detective, went back to law school when I was a toddler, and then worked in the federal system as a staff attorney, and then became a judge. So I had a front row seat. If he had a criminal docket going, I wanted to sit there and watch it. If he had most certainly a murder trial that he was presiding over, boy, I wanted to be front row. And having that lived experience of watching him dedicate his career to public service, it was just a no-brainer that I had to be the one that had the privilege of fighting for justice. I get to be the vehicle every day through which truth stands before a jury, and it is an honor.
Yeah, and you and I have had this discussion as we've gotten to know each other about the fact that it is a real honor to be able to do that and stand before a jury and before a court and represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky like you do. And I remember you and I were talking a little bit about how you've talked to younger prosecutors. Tell me a little bit about the quote. I remember you saying, you're not the one that gets to be nervous."
Yeah. Well, and that's particularly important when we're dealing with child victims. You know, children who have experienced abuse and exploitation, we know through the research that it's most often at the hands of someone they know. So we're dealing with an individual who has experienced a deep betrayal of trust, sometimes at the hands of someone they deeply love. And when you're sitting across the table from a child who is, they don't stop being a child because they've been thrust into the criminal justice system. And we as the prosecutors have to be that calming presence. We have to let the children know that, it is not little Sally versus the defendant in any criminal case. It is always the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus the defendant. And when every time almost that I make that distinction, whether I'm speaking with a child or an adult, there is an audible sigh of relief because our victims shouldn't bear the burden of the prosecution. I tell younger prosecutors, victims have one job, and that is to tell the truth. That's it. You tell what happened to you. Law enforcement investigates it. Charges are then placed. And then it is the Commonwealth that is prosecuting that defendant. So it all goes back really to the principles of Marsy's Law and how we share information, how we consult with victims. And through that information sharing, through that consultation, we help victims to assess and establish proper expectations for what this experience is going to be like, all about. And when we do that, that's when we connect with crime victims in a way that I believe gives them the best shot of really experiencing justice.
Yeah, and you make a great point, and you talk about the partnership with everybody who speaks on behalf of victims and advocates for victims, including victim witness advocates.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so excited to mark the 5-year anniversary of Marsy's Law in Kentucky. And so I reached out to Emily Postel, Dr. Emily, as you call her,
Yes.
who is just an absolute superstar. She's been on this interview series before as well. And I wanted to talk to her tell me a little bit about who are some of the advocates and the fighters for justice and survivors in Kentucky that you can think of as we mark 5 years of success for Marsy's Law. First thing that came to her mind was you.
Oh,
And
wow.
and I think that the partnership is great because what we try to do when we first go into a state and even introduce the concept of Marsy's Law is we let them know that this is not some ballot initiative that once it passes, the people who are behind it will just leave. We come to a state and we start to form partnerships and alliances early in order to ultimately achieve our purpose, which is meaningful and enforceable constitutional rights for victims. But that doesn't end on election day. In fact, it really begins. And the exciting thing about places like Kentucky, where we now have 5 years of work to look back on and to celebrate and to think about how exciting it's going to be moving forward,
Mhm.
it's proof positive to other states. This is how Marsy's Law works. And we have a state director who will stay in a state like Dr. Emily. We wish we could replicate her and have her in every single state that we have Marsy's Law passed. And she wrote, for instance, a fantastic law review article, co-authored, called
Yes.
Truth Without Trauma: Reducing Re-Traumatization Throughout the Justice System. And it's an absolute must read for anybody in this business. And you've told me that when you were in the Attorney General's office, you actually took her article and sent it to everyone in all 120 counties in the Commonwealth.
Yes, all those serving as victim advocate did receive that as part of a training that the Office of Victims Advocacy, led by the executive director, Robin Diezdo, who is an extraordinary professional. She allowed me to send that out and into the offices and the hands of victim advocates who are working one-on-one with victims of crime throughout the state. And in that article, one of the things that is so beautifully articulated is the need to assess and then establish expectations, because our victims, they have had an extraordinarily traumatic experience all on their own. No one comes to meet the prosecutor because something positive has happened, right, Peter?
Right.
And so then they come into a criminal justice system, which is in and of itself overwhelming. And they don't know what to expect. And they may have very real expectations that come from TV or movies. That is very real. When that is your source of information, then the prosecutor needs to A, recognize that, and then B, validate the feelings that walk through the door with the victim, and then help them to establish their understanding, so that when those inevitable things happen, when a court date is moved, if a trial is rescheduled, they say to themselves, oh, but Aimee told me from the beginning these things could happen. It is our role and responsibility to help in that way. And Dr. Emily's article does such a beautiful job of helping not just victim advocates, but also prosecutors understand how we have to connect and lead with empathy and compassion so that we can provide the necessary support to crime victims. It is extraordinary.
Yes, and one of the things that you're so sensitive to, because you started to learn this as a toddler. Like you said, you had a front row seat as a teenager. And so you had almost a natural courtroom presence before you even started law school. But for those who aren't sensitive to it, to be trained through the Office of Victim Advocacy in the Attorney General's office, or through a partnership with Marsy's Law and prosecutors' offices, it's absolutely invaluable. And you make the great point of the trauma that could be revisited once the criminal justice system is introduced. And so this secondary victimization is a real thing. And it almost seems natural as to why that is a thing. If you look at, and there's a little grid that Dr. Emily puts in her article that has a side-by-side that talks about the requirements of courtrooms and the criminal justice system and the needs of a victim, how they're almost the exact opposite, and how you need to be so tender to make sure that you are able to reconcile those. And just a couple of examples. A court requirement is a public challenge to their credibility through cross-examination, right to confront witnesses, all constitutional rights. Whereas a victim's needs are social acknowledgement and support, not challenges, not public challenges. A court requirement, which is complex rules and criminal procedures where they have absolutely no control, versus the needs of a victim, which is to establish a sense of power and control, which a prosecutor like you from the very beginning is able to do and able to foster. Just a couple of more court requirements. Sometimes you have to respond to a set of yes or no questions in cross-examination. And a victim's needs in that particular setting is an opportunity for them to be able to tell their stories in their own way. Reliving the experience is a court requirement. You have to do it. whereas a victim's need might be to limit as much exposure to the reminders of that trauma as you can.
Mhm.
And finally, the court requirement of a face-to-face confrontation with your perpetrator, whereas a victim's need naturally sometimes is to fear any direct confrontation with their perpetrators, especially of those horrific kind of crimes that you've prosecuted.
Yes.
And that is why I think the synergy between Marsy's law and prosecutors, when it works the way that it does in Kentucky, is really setting a model for the rest of the country. And that's why I've been so excited to be able to showcase this and this partnership. Can you tell us a little bit about the unit? So you were in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office
Yes.
prosecuting cases, back to the AG's office. So you went from one county to 120 counties, and then focused on another county. And tell us a little bit about the Vulnerable Victims Unit. A lot of people on TV will see SVU, Special Victims
Yes.
Unit, and you and I have this conversation. You say,
Mhm.
you know what? Every victim is special, but not every victim is necessarily vulnerable in the way that you had described it to me. And I thought you did it in such a great way. If you could talk about that.
Sure. Well, so the vulnerability in particular strikes me when we're talking about children. And as I referenced earlier, we know that the research shows us, the numbers show us that children are most often perpetrated upon physical abuse, sexual abuse, and exploitation by individuals they know. So it is not uncommon. I've had many, many cases where a perpetrator is father to the victim or grandfather to the victim. And it is not uncommon for children to love the perpetrator. They love their grandpa. They have a good time at grandpa's house. They wish they could go and have Christmas at grandpa's house like normal. They don't love the abuse, obviously. And so it is on me as the prosecutor to, upon first meeting them, validate maybe some conflicting feelings that I, as the professional, as the trauma-informed professional, should know to anticipate. Two things can be true at the same time. The child can love their father, let's say the father's the abuser, and I can hold them accountable. And so that's when we circle back to the prior example I gave of talking with that child and saying, remember, it's not you versus dad. Never would Aimee put you in that situation. It is the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus dad. And you can love dad and I can hold him accountable. And those things can happen at the exact same time. And I also see that routinely in our domestic violence cases. Victims will come to me after they are safe, they are out of the heat of that extremely tense, life-threatening sometimes scenario that may have caused them to call 911. So when that physical vulnerability resolves, and we know the cycle of domestic violence begins, it is routine for victims of domestic violence to come to me and say, listen, Aimee, what I said is true, but I love him. And what I say to that is you can love him and I can hold him accountable. And we can take that truth all the way to the witness box. And if they need me to say on direct, do you still love him? Or were you compelled to be here today? Were you served with a subpoena? Yes, I was. Both of those things are powerful because they send a very clear message to the defendant. It's not the victim, it's the Commonwealth. Because we know these crimes, particularly these crimes of interpersonal violence and abuse and exploitation, while they are certainly crimes against a victim, no question, they are also crimes against the Commonwealth, against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. And that's where it all comes full circle and where Marsy's law really does step in to shine a light on why we have to treat our crime victims with dignity and respect.